Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the It's About Time Writers Reading Series. This series was founded by Esther Helfgott and dedicated to the memory of her mother, Anna, who began writing at age 70, and also dedicated to the memory of Nelson Bentley, the quintessential teacher who gave Anna and scores of others help and hope. It's About Time is dedicated to an end of racism and homophobia, anti-Semitism, homelessness, and more. Tonight, we're going to start with the writer's craft with Sati Mookherjee. Her theme is recklessness and resolution, and she'll also be doing some readings. We also plan to hear from Sharon Hashimoto, Robert Reeves, and Sari Krosinsky. We have an exciting lineup of open mic participants tonight. We're going to kick right off, and I hope you're all enjoying the fact that we have returned to the writer's craft, which was re-inaugurated, that's a word, by Priscilla Long in April. So I'm delighted to welcome, I believe, a first-time reader here, Sati Mookherjee. She is the author of the poetry collections I and Ways of Being. Her work appears in literary magazines and anthologies, and her collaborations with contemporary classical composers have been performed or recorded by ensemble and solo musicians. Nominated for 3 Pushcart Prizes and recipient of an Artists Trust Washington State's Art Commission Fellowship, she lives in the Pacific Northwest, and I've been showing everyone that she was recently written up, lauded greatly in the Seattle Times. Welcome, Sati.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you. Thank you again. Just so happy to be with all of you and talk about writing and hear poetry. This is delightful. So when Peggy invited me to give this craft talk, I was completely delighted because I have been actually curious about what I did in my second book that just came out. And I felt like this would be a great opportunity. I was sort of examining it anyway. And so I thought this will be great because this will really force me to articulate some of the questions I've had. So why the title? Because again, I was exploring exactly what happened in the second book. So my first book is called I, and the first book was written in a very particular way. It was written very intentionally. It was very carefully orchestrated. It was put together very deliberately to achieve certain ends. In the second book, which is called Ways of Being, my brain wasn't working when I wrote that book. My frontal lobe was broken when I wrote that book through either because of grief or because of depression or because of some combination thereof. So the very frontal lobe that helped me write, that made me write the first book, was, MIA when it came time to writing the second book. So then I was curious, well, how did this happen exactly? And what I found was happening is I generated clots and clumps of language, and then later, when my brain was working again, I revised those fragments, those lumps, those clods into a manuscript. So I was very aware that the two processes were completely different, but I didn't want to leave it at that. I didn't want to leave that at the story of, well, this is something that happened to me. I wanted to examine it a little bit and understand better how it happened and see if I could. So I had some agency in the whole thing, if that makes sense. So there's a psychologist named Jonathan Haidt who has this wonderful metaphor of the elephant and the rider. And the elephant is the subconscious mind, and the rider is the conscious mind. The rider is the frontal lobes, if you will, and the elephant is the subconscious mind, and how we sort of bodily, viscerally hold our experiences, all of that. And as we all know, the elephant is much, much, much bigger than the rider. The elephant is much, much stronger than the rider. The rider is this little figure perched on top of this big elephant. So so I kind of wanted to not just be the writer taken on a ride by the elephant, you know, lumbering where it will, but sort of hold the reins a little bit with some intentionality. So, okay, so the first word, recklessness, where did that come from? So somebody, my husband actually, gave me a book called The Art of Recklessness by Dean Young. And I don't know if you guys know this series. Well, first of all, Dean Young is a wonderful poet who many of you may be familiar with. He very sadly died very young at the age of 67. From COVID-related complications in August of last year. So this Art of series, I highly recommend it. If you don't know it, it's put out by Grey Wolf Press, and there's wonderful titles in the series like The Art of the Poetic Line, The Art of Syntax, The Art of the Ending. It's a wonderful series, but I hadn't seen this book before. And so the word recklessness caught my eye. So before I dive into what Dean Young says about recklessness, I was curious why that word caught my eye. What was it about that word that seemed to land for me? And so I just dug a little bit into the etymology of that word. So the wreck part of recklessness comes from the Middle English, from a verb reckon or retchen. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, R-E-C-C-H-E-N, and it means to care, heed, have a mind, be concerned about. And if you trace it further back to the PIE, or the Proto-Indo-European root, that comes from, the root is R-E-G, and that meant to move in a straight line. And the derivatives of that led to words for leadership or ruling. So in Sanskrit, the Sanskrit word Raj, meaning king, or the British Raj, their rule, comes from that R-E-G. And later in Latin, regere, to rule, like, you know, we get all the kingly words out of that. So anyway, but it meant to move in a straight line. So, and then less obviously means lacking, does not have, cannot be. And the word less in recklessness, the PIE, the Proto-Indo-European root of less, is a word that is spelled L-E-U, and it means to loosen or divide or cut apart. Okay, so then I just wanted to dig into what is this word, where does it come from, recklessness? So we have this notion of moving in a straight line and abandoning that, dividing that, cutting that apart. So jumping over to Dean Young, his subtitle is Poetry as Assertive Force and Contradiction. And he makes an argument, well, for starting off, he would be appalled at this very conversation we're having. He says in all caps, the writing of poetry is not a craft. We are making birds, not bird cages. We might as well have been discussing how to hold your pinky finger while drinking tea. Poetry is the manipulation of craft elements. Give me a break, a smashing, at least a little rattle. So he really exhorts us to return to the roots, if you will, of this whole endeavor and what's it all about. And he says art's greatest obligation is to its own liberty. And what does he mean by to its own liberty? He claims that poetry is about first needs, basic needs. And let me read you that little section. Poetry arises out of recklessness and is composed of convictions, of first needs, first minds, of truth and language arising from the active impulse of emotion, moving through the calculations of the rational toward irrational detonation. So he goes on to say, more than intending, the poet attends. And in fact, he says prescription and intentions are traps because they promise a certainty of outcome. Okay, So that certainly mirrored my own experience with the second book, where it really was about first needs. The poems are about grief and loss. So it was very primitive, primal, basic things I was grappling with about life and death, and self and other. So, okay, well, what to do with all that rawness, what to do with all that primal force, what to do with the bird uncaged. In my case, that material was not enough to make a poem. That was not enough to be poetry in and of itself. So then the word recklessness, as I pointed out in my title of this talk, came from the book, but then resolution, it seemed like that wasn't enough. I needed an and something. And so where did resolution come from? That was my word. That's the word that felt right. And what's interesting is my instinct about that word was a sense of coming together, a sense of something concrete, something you could hold, as in resolute. So I sort of countered the rampaging freedom, the stampeding elephant, if you will, of recklessness with resolution. That just seemed like the natural word to me. So I dug into that a little bit. What does that word mean? Where does it come from? So even as I thought of it as something firm, what it actually meant was something very different, I found. So it comes from the Old French résolver, or the Latin resolvere. And I'm sorry if anybody speaks Latin, and I clearly don't, but those verbs both meant to loosen, to loose, to unglue. And in fact, the word resolve originally in English meant to melt, dissolve, reduce to liquid. So if you remember back to our friend Hamlet, Hamlet says, "Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve into a dew." So what he meant was dissolve. So that was the original sense of the word. So breaking that out a little bit, no, so bear with me. I'm sorry, this is all, I don't mean for this to be so tangled, but I just find it so interesting. So looking at the word resolve then, so R-E means back, okay, fine. Solvere, S-O-L-V-E-R-E, means again to loosen, untie, release. But if we take solvere and go back to the PIEs, to the Proto-Indo-European roots, solvere breaks into the sound, the S sound, and it's this weird SWE sound. And it's a third person reflexive pronoun, meaning we ourselves. And then the rest of it, solvere, the S part is that reflexive pronoun, but the rest of it, the olvere part, goes back to LEU. It also comes to that LEU, meaning loosen, loosen, divide, cut apart. So the Indo-European root of both recklessness and resolution are the same root, that LEU. Isn't that so interesting? I just about lost my mind when I figured that out. And so what's interesting about that is that that means, like, again, my funny brain kicked this out as a title to Peggy. But what that means is recklessness and resolution are not in opposition to one another. They come from that same root, which makes sense if you think back to our friends, the rider and the elephant, that those are not two entities in opposition to one another, right? In fact, the rider and the elephant achieve some sort of harmonic relationship to each other. They are pulling the same way. So then it made sense to me that why recklessness and resolution go together. So what to do with that, I'm still not sure. But Dean Young points to something, and I want to share that with you. And frankly, I haven't unpacked this piece enough. This is the part that I'm trying to figure out for myself, is what does that mean? How does one learn to ride the elephant? Because the first book, again, my first book, I was all rider. And my second book, Ways of Being, was all elephant. And I would like to get to a place where I have some sort of more harmonic relationship between the two. And it's the exploration of that I'm trying to, that I'm curious about right now. So let me share with you what Dean Young sort of points to. So Dean Young writes, a few years ago, Robert Haas said to me, I still don't know what I'm doing. At which point it occurred to me that not knowing what we're doing is obviously the thing to do. So how does one get better at not knowing what one is doing? This is where the feedback of the workshop can be crucial and vital. In workshop, the product of a poet's not knowing can be examined and exposed, described, so that what is successful for whatever reason, magical music, force of structure, variety of juxtaposition, can be brought into the light so they become a part of the poet's conscious abilities, additions to a technical repertoire. As Eliot says in Tradition and the Individual Talent, which is an essay, the bad poet is usually unconscious where he ought to be conscious, and conscious where he ought to be unconscious. Let's see. I'll just finish out this paragraph. Forget Eliot's scolding manner and substitute imagination for the unconscious. We can say there's a vital exchange that takes place in poetry. The conscious mind can adopt the discoveries of the imagination and turn them into technical possibilities. But the imagination will not tolerate being known, mastered by the conscious for long. So then it leapfrogs further. And in this way, the poet gets more sophisticated at not knowing what he or she is doing. The other condition can only be complacency, the greatest enemy of art. It is also worth entertaining the notion that the least important time in any workshop is when your own work is being talked about. It's called poetry workshop, not me workshop after all. The imagination wants to say something you can hear, and often what you say about someone else's poem is really what you need to hear about your own. The last thing that I want to say is that there's a section title in this wonderful book where Dean Young says, the error is not to fall, but to fall from no height. So I wish I had a tidy conclusion to give you, and I don't, because I'm still exploring all of this. But I will actually close by reading a poem from Ways of Being. It's a short poem, and I guess it's actually kind of fitting that I don't have a tidy conclusion to offer you, because Ways of Being is a poem about grief and loss. It's not the acute horror or shock of grief and loss, but the period just after, in which one is dislocated, disoriented. The epigraph to the book is a line from a poem by Meloche that asks, "Who am I without you?" And the project of the book is to hold space for not knowing, to hold space for confusion, to hold space for the immensity of this pain without any effort to make it go away, make it better, make it smaller, just to hold space for not knowing. So with that, I will read you one of the poems from the book. It's called Freed. If the arm may not move here or there, it must imagine a new gesture, a radical movement. The leg bent against itself in tendu may evolve, piqué turn, attitude. And so it goes, the vine curlicues along rigid scaffolding bamboo. The formal poem says, no, not that word, no, not that word either, and knocks the mind out of its usual loops into a new field. The door locks and the cell becomes the whole world. Straitjacket straps crisscross the thoracic cavity to shape each newborn breath. The blinkered gaze is a tunnel, a path. You cannot tell me where it ends. It doesn't end. I'll tell you what it looks like when I get there, root-bound, folded against myself as I am, the way origami paper is creased and doubled and bent into blooming. Thank you so much.
That was really amazing how you managed to land right on time. And it just, I'm sure everyone who's listening tonight is going, oh, thank heavens the writer's craft talk is back, because that just is mind-blowing. It was truly a revelation how you took what you called your clots and clumps of language to your epiphany, and then that sense of, we ourselves, and, as you said, to hold space for not knowing. Fabulous. You must come back other times. We must hear more.
Oh, thank you. I would love to anytime. Thank you so much. I was delighted to be asked. So thank you all so much.
Okay. And there's some notes for you in the chat. Now, Carol, did it look like you wanted to say something? Yes.
If it's okay. Dean Young read here at Seattle Arts and Lectures. And then he gave a workshop at Hugo House, which I attended. And I can't remember which event he said this, but somebody asked him about the titles of a lot of his poems, and they have nothing to do with the poem itself. And he said, oh, I just plucked them out, and I have a whole list of things that appear to me, and I just pick one and I titled the poem that. And I was sitting here listening to you talk and explain how this title arrived and why it was how it met, and wondering how he would sit here listening and grinning from ear to ear to hear you do the opposite of what he had done a lot.
Hopefully grinning and not grimacing.
No, he would have been grinning.
Okay.
Yes. Of course. Anybody who just plucks something out and titles it and is having a really good time and then becomes famous, like this. I just think this, I knew the book was in back of me, so I grabbed it. Anyway, it was just perfect. You and Dean Young together. Yes.
Thank you.
What we're going to do now is go to our first two open mic people. And I know that Sylvia can handle it. So Sylvia, you're up, followed by Susan Gardner. So Sylvia.
I had no idea, of course, that it would be so perfect to come after someone talking about language in the lovely way you did, Sati. That was just a fantastic talk. Much to think about. So this poem is called Language Lessons. It's in 4 parts. 1, so many languages to learn in a life. The tongues of relationships, daughter, sister, girlfriend, lover, wife, mother, grandmother, arcing from baby to crone, filaments to weave into something called family. The argots of careers, student and teacher, professor and therapist, and the idioms of interests, musician, gardener, poet. How did that last one become what I call myself now? 2, all the places I've lived have taught me new languages, inflated my lexicon, tutored me in the meaning of words like wail and grief, giddy and joy, lusting and satisfied. Always the possibility to create our own words, devise a grammar, push beyond the limits, like the deaf-blind who in this century invented a language, called it protactile, part ASL, part Laura Bridgman and Helen Keller, part the absolute human needs for physical contact and communication. 3, we use language to unite and to divide. But even our uniting is done at a distance. We meet virtually, or if in the same room, maintain whatever our culture decrees is the appropriate interpersonal space. Imagine that seeing and hearing are gone. Your remaining senses, touch, taste, smell, and perhaps that mysterious sixth sense, are what's left to work with. How would you convey moonrise shimmering on a lake? How would you express the wind furling spring leaves like so many muslin sleeves? 4, whatever your language, ask yourself, what is it you most want to say, and to whom? Not hypothetical questions, but a matter of life and death. People die of loneliness. Learn the languages of love. Practice them often. Expand your vocabulary. Thanks.
Thank you. It's so exciting to have sometimes been present at the birth of a poem. I feel very proud, Sylvia. Susan Gardner, I got your email asking to be part of Open Mic.
I wasn't clear that this was going to be a craft program, but my new book, which comes out next month, opens with night work. In the night silence, the house hums darkly. Wood creeps with memory of its tree life. Refrigerator defrosts itself around ice cream. Some small invisible creature scratches at the screen, curls against the still warm wall. Soft snores, shifting sheets, unseen stars. Everyone sleeps in the dark. Over the page, one bulb burns, word after word, one sheet after another. A very much less scholarly, but kind of more my true way.
Thank you.
I was very fortunate to have a lot of experiences in residencies in various places, and every one of them has made me see the world in a different way. And I'm torn between one in Scotland and one in Ireland, but I think I'll go with Scotland. Oh no, this is Ireland too. Drizzle dawn. A fret of rain rouses the drizzled day. Mist shimmers, passes, wheels back, until for a quarter hour it lifts to reveal the edges of clouds. On St. Mullins stone belfry walls above the river, condominiumed nests crowd higher. In flapping air, noisy thousands blank, curl, shift to starboard, curl furiously. Moot meeting of the Parliament of Crows.
I'm so delighted. Susan is going to be joining us as a featured reader. Remind me of the month, do you recall?
September.
Oh, ways off. Well, you just have to join us for more, 3-minute open mics between then. So, all right, let's check on Sharon. Welcome. Okay. Sharon taught composition and creative writing classes at Highline College in Des Moines, Washington. Did you say Des Moines? Maybe I'm saying it like you say it in Iowa. Sorry. For 29 years, recently retired, she is concentrating more on her own stories, poems, and a novel in progress. Her first poetry book, The Crane Wife, was co-winner of the Nicholas Roerich Prize in 2003 and reprinted by Red Hen Press in 2021. That same year, her second collection of poetry, More American, won the 2021 Off the Grid Poetry Prize, and More American went on to win the 2022 Washington State Book Award in Poetry. Welcome, Sharon.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So I want to thank Peggy for inviting me, and for Shati for her lovely, I only caught part of it, but I always love to listen to Shati and what she has to say. And to Sylvia and Susan for their poems that they've read during the open mic. I need to take a breath. That was like half an hour that I struggled to get on, but it's all me because my brain is too full of sunshine right now to really focus and get myself together. But I'm glad you're here, and I see most of us are indoors, where we'd probably prefer to be outside with a glass of iced tea because it's so sunny and beautiful. But I'm glad that you're all here, and I'm glad that I finally made it. Tonight, what I thought I'd do is I wanted to talk about people. So I picked up a whole bunch of narrative poems to read tonight. And the first one involves somebody that I knew when I was going to grammar school. And I went to Brighton Elementary School in South Seattle. And in the classes that I was taking as a young person, a kid, there was me and one other Japanese American student, and who was really, really, really smart. And I was never super smart. I was smart because my parents helped me. And what they would do is they would I'd become well, every week I was the class project, you know, like make sure and memorize her multiplication table, or make sure she does her spelling words and all of that. And then one day a new student, a Filipino girl, came in who was younger than me. And her name was Erlinda, and she was very, very smart. And what my teacher did was she took me aside and said that I was supposed to look after her. And so they didn't quite know what to do with her. And this poem's called To Erlinda, 50 Years Later. 4th grade, 5th grade, the principal didn't know where to place your IQ, but backed against the wall in a spelling bee, you firmly went through oxymoron without pauses, knowing the rules. Say the word twice, before and after, or you're out. Take care of Erlinda, Miss Redlinger said to me, but you had no coat, no lunch, no 3 cents for milk, only the thin blue sweater and one dress you wore every day. I never knew you were hungry. Who kept you scrubbed, smelling of Clorox, your hair unevenly trimmed? In a nasal voice, you mimicked your aunt who put a mop in your muscles to work. Not that way. Then you'd frown and mutter, little bitch, words I didn't understand. When straight-A Julie shot her hand up, you glared at her curled hair held back by berets. We were the other 2 Asians, Japanese, Filipino, dark-skinned and silent. You pushed your sweater sleeves up past your elbows or fastened the chip button bottom to top. For a week, we shared of mice and men, you tapping your pencil, waiting for me to flip the page so you could speed on to Lenny and his mouse. Your forehead furrowed. I didn't know how you could glance at a paragraph and know Lenny would die. Because you were tardy, then sick, I stopped saving assignments for you and counting the days you were gone. Absent from the photographs of our 8-page yearbook, you were only there in the beginning. So I got a lot of little stories, and my father was an excellent athlete. You know, he played baseball when he was young. He was a really good tennis player. And I've always felt sorry for him because none of his 3 kids were ever athletic. And I think it must have been a real disappointment for him. One of the things that he really did do well in was that he was an excellent golfer. And but what we could do is we could help him out in terms of giving him advice. And over time, you know, he would get into the living room and he'd do some swings. And I think he thinned out the rug and put a couple of divots in it, which my mother didn't really like. But he also won several trophies from the different golf leagues that he played in. This is called The Golfer's Daughter. Herman the mouse skitters into his living room hole on our black and white TV. I'm sipping grape juice from a plastic cup when my father strides in with a golf club nested against his shoulder. 4 mice in suspenders bend over, squealing their high-pitched laugh. Will you watch me, Dad asks, flexing his arms and planting his feet 18 inches apart. Just as a cat's claws surround Herman, I nod yes. Dad's fingers choke down the rubber handle. Tell me if I move my head. Herman blinks his eyes. Only his chin and huge ears are in sight, but I'm sure he'll escape. Over and over in swift arcs that cuff the rug, skimming close to the ceiling, my father swings. I know he keeps his jaw down, anchored to his chest. He won't see that my eyes haven't left the screen. So it's hard for me to realize that in 2011 was the Tohoku Japanese earthquake and the tsunami were 12 years ago. You know, that's when your TV sets were all filled up with the water coming by in Japan and just like moving these cars and just sweeping all these fields away. It could happen here, and I keep thinking about that sometimes. But when I was looking at the news stories, they were also talking about how there were these cattle farmers who were forced from the hills that they'd called home for decades. And of course, at that time was the nuclear disaster at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. So I've played a little bit around with this and I talked in a different voice. This takes place in Fukushima, Japan, and is called Nuclear Cattle, and is in the point of view of a cow. That day I stood, knees locked, on my 4 feet to stand my ground as it began to sway. I didn't see, but I smelled the change. Dirt littered with fallen swallows, overwhelmed by muddy ash. My herd wandered through broken fences. Some lay where they were tethered. Others died with heads thrust through the holes of the troughs, waiting to be fed. On the dirt farm road, buses shuttled our people away. Dogs, pigs, cats, we were all left behind. Only our voices filled the air. Soon bodies lay amid splintered boards and puddles. Some of us survived on our own, grazing the abandoned rice paddies. We lifted our heads to bulldozers and tractors, hauling the dead to burning pyres, inky columns of smoke billowing in the wind. 40 days later, my farmer came back. The pasture land is overgrazed. Hungry, I eat whatever feed he brings me. The white spots break out along my flanks. With his Geiger counter ticking, he strokes the place between my ears. Another poem I have that kind of looks at Japan is there are these 2 old women. They were nicknamed kind of like Kin-san, Jin-san, which was the affectionate name for this pair of Japanese celebrity twins. And they went into the Book of Guinness as being the oldest ever living identical twins at 107 years of age. They were discovered in 1991 when they turned 100 years old, and they lived probably another 7 years. And this is from the point of view of the older sister when the younger sister dies. So this is called one of the world's oldest twins dies at age 107 in Japan. Kin Narita, 1892 to 2000. Dear sister, whoever thought we'd live this long? Monkey brows furrowed, the remnants of our hair wisping our necks, tickling our ears. First things we lose last, and I am forgetting the names of all those children. Your 11, my 4 girls, the dead husbands whose photographs dangle on the bedroom wall. Such men wouldn't recognize us now. What's left is our first steps toddling through the farm. Chickens broody on their nests, pungent straw and manure, the eggshell pulsing warm in fingers and palm. I know the throb in the hollow of your throat, beat in rhythm with mine. Someone knelt beside my wheelchair, told me you had the flu, how you skipped breakfast, wanting to sleep through the morning meal. No egg on rice, nothing was sadder than this. A part of me doesn't know you've died. My breath catches as if I'm a girl, running just out of reach of your hand. One of the books I read as a child was Claire Huchett Bishop's Five Chinese Brothers, which had many, many, many problems, but was an award winner back in 1959. And what caught my attention was that the story is about these identical brothers, each of whom has a specific and unusual ability. So one can hold a sea in his mouth, one has an iron neck, one can stretch his legs, one can survive fire, and one can hold his breath forever. Okay, so this is kind of like before Superman became real popular for me. I was looking at these brothers and thinking about, wow, these are some pretty cool abilities. And so after the Claire Huchett Bishop novel, short story, picture book, I wrote about the first Chinese brother. He's the one who could swallow the sea. So this is first Chinese brother swallowing the sea. 1. Bowing at the edge, I can feel the grainy sand beneath my palms. I name the waters, lower my chin. I unhinge my jaw to take everything in. The first take is a sip of foam, everything the village boy doesn't know, his finger poking clam hose to force a high arc squirt. He stands, hands fisted at his sides, as each level is revealed. Barnacles, anemones, bronzed and many-legged starfish. My tongue is a weight in my mouth, rushing and flowing, kelp and jellyfish like the blood I hold in the chambers of my heart. When I close lips over the last dregs, my cheeks bulge with fullness, with broiling. I am indigo, azure, aquamarine. 2. Sun dims the scales of the deep sea fish, flopping their tails, gills puffing in and out. I never thought the world could be this quiet with stop her to a tangled octopus toward a sucking rivulet. Shoes crushing shells, such a small sound. Something rises and curls inside me, wanting out. I raise 5 fingers as if I could draw the boy back. I drum a driftwood branch against a wide log. I flag my shirt into the wind. His small shape wanders further. Perhaps like so many young, he chooses not to see. Sweat breaks out under my chin. I sputter. When the dam of my lips finally parts, the sea spews forth. My voice is lost in the sea's own. The boy's last words, as loud, as raucous as a seagull's female cry. Okay. I'm going to end on a poem that I read last year for Hiroshima to Hope, which is an annual event on Green Lake. And they meet every year, and they have taiko drums, and all this is prefaced before you put names on lanterns and light candles and put them out into the water. So from Hiroshima to Hope is to commemorate the victims of the atomic bombings. The poem is also what we call an abecedarian, so it's an ABC poem. And this is called August 9th. After the flash blasting flat the shoji screens, brushstroke cranes, straining necks disappeared into ash. Mothers evaporated. Children floated on sides of buildings, ghosts of minutes before. Halo light lingered, illuminating the cleared miles between blue jutting mountains and the horizon. Before the lover's kiss was complete, lips barely brushed, one mushroom cloud bloomed. Negative and positive burns outlined women's backs, patterns of water lilies or chrysanthemums, quotes inked on the scroll. Cries ricocheted throughout the ruins. Survivors stood, stuttering. So much was taken. Children sat hunched under broken umbrellas, rocking themselves. Vertical studs and walls creaked. Where would fireflies go? X-rays couldn't find them. Yanking on a barren branch, people discovered 0 blossoms left to fall. Thank you.
Thank you. It was we have the closed captions on, so it was so helpful to see the abecedarian, to kind of see it going by. And I just was fascinated by how you kind of went from like friend, father, cow, sisters, brothers, and then your world got bigger. So I'm so glad. It's frustrating, but I'm so glad you were able to join us tonight. Bravo. Yes, bravo, bravo. We now go to our next 2 open mic readers tonight. That will be Bethany and Denny. So Bethany Reid.
Thanks for making space for me.
You bet.
Great job, Peggy. So a few years ago, before that thing called COVID, I gave a craft talk on Emily Dickinson. And so I thought I would, and in 2020, Ravenna Press published my chapbook of Dickinson riffs as triple number 10. You can see that. So that's available, and I'll read a couple of the short ones. Her begging bowl. Life is over there, she wrote, setting it on a high shelf. Rising at night, she'd light her lamp, take out a scrap of paper, a pencil stub, her fragile, fractured life. It had to be set somewhere, so she arranged it into lines abutting white space. And what could be more like life than that? A newer Sèvres pleases, she wrote, imbuing the fine china with a longing to be of use. You there, I here, as if it too begged to be broken. And since it's almost Mother's Day, I'll read the one that's more or less about my mother. Her short history of falling. Memory of her mother's footfall as she crossed the hallway, the fall of a single breath, fall in folly and full, fires spark its arc and flash downward, hems lowered, the trip over the porch step, leaf fall and snow fall, morning fog, a syllable dropped at the end of a word, the amen at the end of a prayer, the voice, a whisper, her hand limp on the bed cover, the owl's following flight to the vole's heart, knell of a bell, lid of the piano closing on its keys. Thanks for listening. It's good to be here today.
Oh, those were lovely. I think the very first It's About Time I attended back in the 90s sometime. I think you were a reader. It's so good. I had loved your writer's crop, but it's so good to hear your poetry as well. Thank you.
Love at first sight, Peggy.
Oh, there you go, Bethany. Back at you. I remember, talk about twins, right? So let's see. Denny.
Yeah, hello. Thank you to all the great poets out there. This one's with apologies to the great poet, Wallace Stevens. 9 ways of looking at a barbecue. Why only 9? Because I'm lazy and reluctant to waste our mutually precious time. 1, among 20 smoky backyard barbecues, the only thing cooked was my goose. 2, a man, lighter fluid, and charcoal are 1. 3, which is preferable, mesquite chips or briquettes, the smell of braised ham or roasting sweet potatoes? 4, oh, fat men with beer guts, do you imagine your sauces are golden? Do you not see how the circling women embellish your seasonings? 5, the chickens are grilling, raccoons must be lurking, keep an eye out. 6, once he left the backyard out of sight and lost a prime ribeye. 7, 3 days and nights the black cod marinated. Is this really the time to turn vegan? Can't you include fish? 8. Once his doctor warned him of high cholesterol, but that doctor has since passed away. We all take our chances, like it or not. 9. Oh, for the sweet smell of meat in the lingering evening air and the first rays of Venus in the western twilight. Wait a minute, that must be an Airbus landing at SeaTac. Morning jokes with noon. See them apples gone by midnight, snack hour on the half shell, open tulips gone, roadies on the rise, pink tissues, and the purple laurels bend their branches low on the weight of swollen reputations in disputation. Only augmentation, sensible scent, oral communication, visual notification, a pigment of the purple's imagination, a pinned pimiento on the tail of a skewer. Let the eyes graze bursting buds and the swollen tide, the new moon's springs. It's a funny business getting out of your body, as every spirit knows, scribing the immaterial with whatever's around, rock, salt, splash, voicings, vortices, you name it. Why, just last week I was leaving my body when an earthquake hit me sideways in the heart chakra, and there I was, suspended between indigestion and revelation, a cog in the cosmic constant, looking for home in an out-of-the-body experience. So what's a spirit to do? The rhythm grooves on whomever moves in and out of the painting, casting shadow and light in fragments of some Orphic curve on the lyre's neck, heron-headed, tilt to tidal sway in keys by quays.
Thank you, Denny. As you can imagine, after meeting at the Poetry Box, we ran into each other again at a strange impromptu wine tasting held in the spice section of the Ballard Market. And we were probably the only people discussing Wallace Stevens, but then I got to thinking about Judy Chicago and had to go home and do another deep dive. So it's always an experience. Thank you. I'd like to say hello to Bob Reeves. You want to say hi?
Hello.
All right, now I shall introduce you. I say hello, Bob, and I'll introduce him as Robert. Robert Arthur Reeves taught philosophy and religion at the University of New Mexico and Central New Mexico Community College. After his retirement, he moved with his partner, Sari Krosinsky, to Bremerton, Washington. A poet since 1965, he has self-published several poetry books, including Shadows on the Land, Collected Poems, Veiled Windows, Selected Poems 2010 through 2019, Radiance, and his most recent, Here Below. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you all for being here. I'm going to be reading from 3 of the books that are mentioned in the bio, but first a poem by Sari Krosinsky called Morning Goals Group. I say, go Team Silver, but refrain from the fist pump. Someone might take it for a threat around here. Richard smiles, a rare twitch of lips. I answer, depressed and mildly amused to the attempted blending of icebreaker and therapy. My name is X and I feel A and B. I fancy Richard thinks I'm laughing at him, an ill-timed grin, inmate to inmate. Nobody asks Richard why he's here. Nobody has to. The scabbed slits across his throat preempt the tale. I try not to look at or away from the mark of this failed attempt at what I chose against when I came here. James tells me I'm lucky I didn't try it. Look how it messed up the ones who did. I'm lucky. It's Failed Windows. Failed Windows covers 10 years of writing, but this next poem only appears in Failed Windows. The Opal Miners. It had to be Johnny. Johnny was always the one whose pursed breaths got us glowing with visions we nearly believed in, who found it, ad or story, in one of those lonely male mags, Argosy or whatnot, where men in wild places strode and achieved without women. Absence of women so loud it made a spring of life in the men, a roaring source they discovered with backs and hands. The article said the Australian government would pay good money to people willing to dig for opals in the outback, would support them on homesteads miles thick with claims, inevitably founts of the lavish tinted stones, perfect riches rolled and clicked in the palm. Who or what the market was for opals in such profusion wasn't part of the story, or why Australia hadn't been clogged long since with lazy billionaires practically scooping the slenderly shining things out of an inch of dust. I nearly believed it. It came from Johnny. Enough that the move to Australia waited semi-solid at high school graduation, with its sun leathered skin and bounding beasts and poisonous hills. The car, oh yeah, a Land Rover, we'd buy with the initial lure money and drive to the fertilities of the opals. It was a choice of futures as sane as any touted to us on career day, and a group destiny. Paul, Johnny, and I together as men, the way we were together as boys, talking over the latest Twilight Zone or Man from U.N.C.L.E. This year, now that the APA has ruled traditional masculinity to be a form of mental illness, I thought about Paul, Johnny, and I, the opal miners. 50 years since we've all three seen each other, and all our lives knotted like ropes around females, thick on the ground as the opals in our vision, or scanty as actual opals probably are, but round as birth, round as childhood dead and gone, glossy with a shine just beneath the skin and the palest colors of the outback scrub and sky. Radiance was mostly written in the lockdown phase of the pandemic. Here's a poem about that called My View. I look out the window onto a ground dressed with sun, poor shreds of undistinguished trees, here and there sharp glass flashing, dirty raccoons shoving by more often than should be likely here downtown on their way to cloudy mysteries. It's night though, and something in me refuses to see the outside reduced to colorless bone of itself in bully glare from the still lot behind the link fence. Something? I know what the something is. Fever, mirroring sun, collecting it in my cheekbones and nose, a red cross. Is it the coming of that fever? Today's been a week since I left the building, pushed the button to cross the street, afterwards may have touched my face. I doubt it. More probably some minor flush of stress, momentary, unthreatening. I cling to probability like a religion, lighting one mind candle after another till the night is a burning church, till it's the day. All the rest of the poems will be from my latest book, Here Below, which has 5 parts and some appendices. I'll read one poem from each. Part 1 is from 2021. For a long time that year, I tried to write something about the events of January 6th, but I couldn't come up with anything that satisfied me till September. January 6th. He tells them to head up the street and they go. In a grunting and joyous jostle, to find and torment those who would dare elect someone else. And we who have dared elect someone else are fixed to our TVs by the trampling, shit-smeared carnival of brutes wandered out of whispery online cliques, their hates eager as cold blades glinting in cold daylight, and a beast America burning like a black candle in their eyes. The pallid officials, their enemies and friends alike, fleeing cowed into heavy, low-breathing rooms, while the puzzled, howling victors hulk throughout the empty halls as if choreographed in bloody forest rites from a time before history and heart. In their midst, a tall horned man in a wolf's pelt with striped face stares into the cameras. We stare back from everywhere else in the shreds of our country. Part 2 of Here Below contains the transcript of a verse play I wrote 50 years ago called Iona, a Colloquy. about the conflict between Druids and Christians during the Dark Ages. Here's the prologue, spoken by Dunstan the Druid. And sorry about the voice, but this is how I've always heard the character. The craft and the lore of magicians, the mirth of the laughing wave, have been crimsoned by doom and slept sleepless inside the spiraled cave. It is sunset upon Iona, russet of bark-stripped blood, filters through trees which we planted, who died without names in the mud. Misery's, mastery's foresight, the shrill pacing of the asp, blanket the isle with softness and toughen the daylight's clasp. Placed in the sky are the prices of spring's untenanted doors. Here the uncaught, uncramped night hovers rock-like on the shores. Salvation coquettes like the wood thrush. None will be here to save. The flower of faith from a field sprung new comes soundless and grim on the wave. Naught stems death. This mockery thrusts over our formless reach. A snare for the gist of our actions and peril constricting our speech. The dust on the floors of the secret, they say the seed of the elf, utters signs of the oak and the meadow, but can it hear itself? Let the ritual mutter of duty and history give place to men. When the blood of their banter is finished, let the ocean the island retain. For the tree of my life is no sapling, I wear no prentice's cope. I am ever the haunter of reason, the hapless dimmer of hope. This is Iona the seedling, roots are here hardly set, but this is the last of ageless, on the sea beget. Part 3 has poems from 2022. Here's one I wrote for a former best friend of mine after he posted photos on Facebook of his return to the place in Maine where we met. We both converted to Christianity in 1970, and 10 years later I deconverted and he did not. The poem is Henry at Ferry Beach. 57 years later, you went back to where our friendship began. It ended 15 years afterwards, but still means everything to you because without it, you'd have never found God. That's another of my friendships that ended. Your lifelong goal, new life anyway, of getting Roe v. Wade overturned had finally occurred. And here you were in front of the main building with its pride flags, a grizzled right-wing Catholic wearing a rainbow tie-dye t-shirt, dipping into your Unitarian past for a couple of photographs of a summer camp at the close of summer. No one around to haggle with you over what was and wasn't a woman's body, what was and wasn't a person. Cheery and relaxed on the winning side, the side of the bullies. When we met, we were both on the other side. In part 4, I thumbed back through some old chapbooks of mine and changed my mind about 15 poems. Here's one I wrote for a woman who had gone to Europe as a missionary to convert the Catholics to Christianity. I was a Catholic myself at the time, and this is what I thought of that. To a friend in France. The sun in the circle of cathedral glass is not what the buried architects built to cherish. The raucous dancing hall of gypsy-colored spirit pulses with strange mourning. The light they meant is parsecs away, these powerless candles a monument to its bare death. Beetling rondures of uncomfortable rock block God from worship, sun from the hand, knower from known in the facades of reliable thought. The boys nearby chuck sous in the river. They below cease to bear the stamp. Copper crowded with salt, reverted to crumbs of green. You walk in the gleam of my eyes like the coined likeness of a crowned king, like the ghost of wax and smoke on the altar. That was written 2 years before Star Wars came out, and you'll notice that unlike Han Solo, I use the word parsec correctly as a measurement of distance. Part 5 of the book has 12 poems from the very beginning of 2023, most of them 7-line things I call semi-sonnets. This one is Semi-Sonnet Philippe Petit. Right after 9/11, all I could think of was that Frenchman who tightrope walked between the Twin Towers. And I found an interview where, of course, he expressed shock and pity, being now a man who had walked high in the sky from nothing to nothing. And finally, the last thing I'll read comes from the 3 completely silly appendices. I'm going to share the screen so you can see the illustrations, such as they are. This is Appendix 2, Bunkle and Frunkle. Said Bunkle to Frunkle, "Tell me, oh why, Frunkle, are there these mice in the sky?" "Mice in the sky can be fathomed with ease. Somewhere hereabouts there's a mountain of cheese. When a mountain of cheese rises over the land, the mice take to the skies in a vast hungry band, dive down on the mountain all ready to sup, and before you can do a thing, eat it all up. But what of the fate of the foxes and minks that dwell on the mountain, the pards and the skinks, the frogs in the streams and the birds on the bough? Oh, after the mice finish, where are they now? We must journey there, Bunkle, and drive off the mice, for eating a mountain would not be quite nice for the creatures who live there, the lice and the trees, belugas and prats and amoebas and bees. But how do we stop them, those mice in the sky? Do you know of a cat who is huge and can fly? Such a thing isn't needed. With only a hat and a scarf and some sunglasses, in no time flat, we can dress up the mountain in such a disguise it will not look like cheese to the mice's red eyes. We can fool their eyes, surely, but don't you suppose it'll still smell like cheese to their sensitive nose? No. The pine trees that grow there produce such a scent with their needles so keen that the mice will relent and assume that a stranger whose head reeks of pine has devoured the cheese and forestalled their design. And then they will give up their sky-faring goals, drop back to the earth, and return to their holes. Thank you all very much.
Well, at first I was thinking that since you'd first taken us to the shreds of our country, that it was quite a departure, but you ended up taking us back to their holes. So it works out after all. Thank you. We now are going to our next 2 open mic readers, Anne Spires or Spears. I'm not doing well with pronunciation tonight. And Jesse Minkert, and then we'll return to hear from Sari Krosinsky. So are you ready, Anne?
I am ready, and I'm going to follow Bethany's lead because I also have a triple series. My triple is number 16 from Ravenna Press, and my chapbook is called Harpoon. And I tried to assume the voice close to myself of being a privileged person, being somewhat conscious of being the other in Baja California. I went down on a trip to see the whaling lagoons because I wanted to connect to my grandfather, who was a master captain and harpooner in the 1920s out of Westport, Washington. And this is about language and using words. Seems like a theme tonight. So I'm going to read 2 short ones. 14. The hunting guide talks Spanish at me. All I can muster are the words, cervezas, por favor. No cervezas arrive. Perhaps we shouldn't be here. I respond, sí, to all he says. I find that repeating sí, yes, sí, is the quickest ticket for an exit. Back on the road descending the flanks of Tre Vergeni's volcano, David advises that saying yes in another's tongue is a dangerous habit. I think these thoughty men are Captain Ricketts and whoever the dude was that wrote journey on the Sea of Cortez, but I could never find the conversation again, but I used it. 15. The thoughty men debate while crossing Baja, whether humans should pause before killing anything equal to their intelligence. At a crossroad, they marvel that a desert boy has all the words. Ballena, Oceano, Gaviota, Almeja, Semaforo. If the group meets someone speechless, is it therefore allowed to kill him? Thank you.
Jesse.
On my 50th birthday, I wanted to do something I was sure to enjoy. So I read my work at an open mic. Well, today is exactly 25 years after that day. And here I am again. The monument disappeared in a blink. Most of us watched as it sank. Some frowned, some cried, some wailed, some just couldn't imagine what silence might sound like if silence were a chance to breathe. Silent for centuries, the monument uttered its last rebuke from under the flood, the glistening obsidian obelisk built over marshes as rain fell, as skies spilled out, as if all days were the same, yet nights refuse to speak, yet twilights hesitate to hear our quiet arrhythmia. What we watched in the hazy distance has come to us in sleep, layered the waking world with vengeful fantasies, bright but false, over a dark scenario we pretended to trust, but in our reveries failed, in our eyes, in our impossible wishes, in the end little more real than dreams. A ruffled cat climbs a stone stoop. A woman journalist in a war zone never painted paintings on the wall. A metal cup. A talking crow watches from its cage. An orca finds itself in show business. Somewhere in the Netherlands, a humanoid machine on a treadmill, cats on bicycles. How much is not enough yet? Always a touch too short, always stuttering on the edge of annihilation. May I have one crisis to fail to resolve at a time? Apparently not today. Nothing of this was a quick transition. How in a movie a teenage 10-year-old boy instantly turns 40. So how long did it take? 3/4 of a century, from the 40s until now. Seemed so brief, seems to have taken most of forever. Don't want to argue with any of that. Can't guess how long yet to go. Another old gimp sits on his hands to hold his own heat inside, not without seepage, but possible. Thank you.
That is quite an amazing birthday poem, is it not? Oh, thank you. Here's to the next 25 of not just open mics, but featured readings. Glad the day worked for you. Come again. Okay, Sari. Sari Krosinsky is a queer autistic writer. Since releasing her latest book of poetry, Meditating in the Dark, Z has been working on a novel and short stories. Z has an MA in creative writing from the University of Mexico. Z lives in Bremerton, Washington, with her partner, poet Robert Arthur Reeves. Krosinsky and Reeves' work is available at outerchildpoetry.com. Welcome, Sari.
The Welcoming Committee. I think they yelled homo, or perhaps it was ohm or home, someone hollered from a speeding window as I walked along the tall iron fence around the naval base before I turned down this quiet street and sat on this bench to talk to my notebook. While the moss picks out a light between cobblestones, I transform the indifferent gift of hollered wit through the alchemy of incomprehension. Was this the call of longing for home, for peace, for natural order? The anger when home, peace, natural order become a question? Do I always have to be the questions no one wants to answer? I am like this moss, lost to home, to peace, to natural order, fit only to fly on wild winds, to root in specks of earth, to encrust the predictable concrete with life in all its chaos, to be soaked and sated and washed away in the next rain. A passel of school children passes chattily behind me. Someone has told them they can be whoever they want to be, as long as they button their shirts on the correct side. Perhaps they are telling each other now. The man masturbating at the foot of the stairs cut into the hill I live on top of is as startled as I am when I appear in the dusk before him, turn to climb, and don't. Half dark shuts us away from the car river, as if the more than half-hidden sun could hide us from headlights beginning to turn on behind my back. It's the driver's will to see nothing but their way home, their way to the bar that hides us, that hid him before my body did. He fills the narrow stairwell, thin as he is. I am locked in my cement square, deer in the headlight. He recovers his composure first, grins, invites me to join him. The invitation isn't why he's doing this here. Given the right circumstances, one place is as good as another. This one has 3 walls. There's a driveway around the corner I can climb to my apartment. I do, and silently wish the man on the stairs the best orgasm he can get without my help. As you may have already guessed, Bob and I are trading poems this evening. So this next poem is by Robert Arthur Reeves from his new book Here Below. The poem is called Sizes. My father is behind a door. My friends and I can't play before it, even near it. He lies dying there. It happened fast. Something grew in his head, swelled, unfolded. Our house folded the other way, closed this door between us. Little thing grew, big thing shrank. I am waking up to being a little thing too, a lacking thing, unable to help beyond the door, even near it. He needs quiet to die. It doesn't take long. Time, the biggest thing, shrinks too. Becomes weeks, then 1 week, then 1 day, a day I don't remember. Something grew in my head, a door. And when we talked about trading poems, Bob said he couldn't do his favorite from my latest book, Meditating in the Dark, because that would be too self-involved. So I'm going to do that poem. Keepsakes. Your wedding band lives in a tiny box of bears atop the plastic dresser drawers above my underwear. You apologize for needing to keep it, to honor a marriage that's not ours. We have no rings, because my sensitive fingers won't tolerate them, because I never want to yoke your finger and mark you as my property. Before we married, I had already engraved your mark upon the backs of my eyelids, under my tongue, inside my cunt. If there's anyone who gets me next, they'll have to feel your marks before they can make their own, as I feel hers beside mine. I'm gonna finish up with a longish short story. I always hear the title in my head in the voice of John Cleese doing Monty Python transitions, but I can't actually do the voice, so you'll just have to imagine it with me. What men and women are, or how to behave in restaurants. Eric says every woman he's dated has sent stuff back to the kitchen, except the ones who made him send it back. And Z says, I never send anything back, and sucks in her lower lip and thinks, oh no, this is one of those conversations about what men and women are, and I answered as if I were a woman. Enough of a woman to be proof of what women aren't. And there was that time I sent back the strawberry shake. This is not a date, and no one will be sending anything back. Not he, nor Z, nor his 2 children. Why, oh why did Z misgenders herself like that? In front of Moon and John too, whom Z could have been showing an example Z wishes Z'd had at their ages. Though Z doubts they were listening to the conversation. Moon is too absorbed in a game that makes her phone emit tiny digital screams, bit screams, whenever she dies. John, too hungry for distraction, is continually turning around onto his knees to peer over the back of the booth toward the kitchen. But children hear more than they let on. This isn't like playing the woman when Z and Eric perform any song that implies, say, a heterosexual romance, or when Z knows the audience is assuming heterosexuality despite a song's gender-neutral I's and U's. Then it's a part Z's taking on, not herself. Eric knows that as well as Z, even if the audience doesn't. Why must Z get so defensive when anyone makes these generalizations about women that Z starts holding herself up as an exception to the rule, as if Z believes Z fits the rule enough to qualify as an exception, as if Z believes there is any rule. Generalizations about men piss her off too, but it never occurs to her to offer herself as an exception. Z knows too well which rule evens her more supportive friends like Eric would allow her to be an exception too. Z tries telling herself it's just a bad habit reinforced by the bad habits of others. Z doesn't like to think Z's hidden away some part of herself that thinks Z really is a woman. Eric says he dated a woman who sent back a sunny side egg 11 times, 4 because the white had wet spots, 6 because it had brown edges, and once because the yolk broke before she got the egg onto the toast. Z asks whether that was their last date, and he says no, they'd had sex for the first time the previous night, and she was really good at it. Then Moon screams, and her player character Bit screams as it dies again in the absence of her saving hand, momentarily pinned along with her arm beneath John's feet, which he clambered to in his haste to see and smell better when the kitchen door swung open. John chases the screams with a roar of frustration. The food is destined for another table. His elbow whacks Moon as he topples back down to his seat, and she yelps again. The player character, still dead, remains silent. Eric stares pinched-mouthed at John, says, aren't you going to apologize? Another roar. No! You stepped on your sister. I know, I can't talk about this now. I'm too angry. Let me calm down first. But Eric keeps pressing, says, it's my job to teach you right from wrong. And John, your job is to ruin my life. Z admires the little asshole, as he never learned to tell her parents to back off when Z needed to be left alone. I did send one thing back, Z says, drawing Eric's attention off while John gathers himself and Moon goes back to her game, pressing herself as deep as she can into the corner of the booth. A strawberry shake. I didn't want to send it back. My parents made me. Z hadn't been able to keep the pout off her lips when Z tasted not chocolate. Couldn't erase the pout fast enough to hide it from them. They said it was their job to teach me to stand up for myself. I didn't want chocolate as much as I wanted not to give a harried, underpaid fast food worker more trouble. I should have stood up to my parents. Andrew has come with a heavily laden tray on one arm and is passing plates, immediately drawing John from his sulk. Andrew says, maybe they gave you the wrong shake on purpose so they could drink the strawberry when you brought it back. I've done that. Then I guess you didn't want any of this because it all looks perfect, Eric says. I might have messed one up if you'd ordered shakes. Bending towards her, Andrew adds in a lower voice, I dated Sunnyside Cindy too. She wasn't that good. You dated her in high school. I think she's learned a few things since then, Eric says. She's just as shitty a tipper as ever. I told her she shouldn't tip based on past performance. John's mouth is stuffed with syrup-dripping pancake before Andrew is gone with a huff meant to sound like a joke. Moon isn't looking up from her phone. So I was lying when I said I never sent anything back, Z concludes. Z's lying too, whenever Z lets Eric calls her brave because of how out Z is, when Z lets him believe it. Is it brave? How Z sometimes plays into the woman part off stage as well as on, as if Z is afraid if Z doesn't present herself the way Z's sure it's still easiest for him to think of her, he won't want to play with her anymore. Z might lose their duo gigs that, unlike their solo performances, actually makes her more money than Z drinks. Z doesn't want to lose that bliss when he starts into the song that's on the tips of their fingers, or when Z sings or says anything that surprises him into that little gasp grunt that makes her belly clench, that makes her want to shock him again. Is he afraid Zerbent's gender might make the heterosexual cisgender man he is not on a date with rule her out as a potential sexual partner? Moon says, "You're not a woman, so you wouldn't count as counter evidence anyway. I don't think Dad has any generalizations to make about the non-binary people he's dated. Have you dated any NBs, Dad?" No. Neither have I, he says quickly with a buffering smile, which Eric looks up from his plate in time to catch and toss back. It occurs to Zer he has spoken this time as an NB. Z doesn't think that's better. It might be the correct category, but Z was still speaking as a category. Would Z ever learn to respond to these what men and women are conversations, not as a woman or as an anything, but only and always as herself? Andrew, returning to top off Zer and Eric's coffee, says, "So how about that apology now, John?" John mumbles, "Sorry I stepped on you," to his lap. Moon shrugs. She says, "When I go on dates, it'll be all walks on the beach and playing video games. Stuff you can't take back because as soon as you stop doing it, it doesn't exist." As he wonders if Moon, like Zer, is thinking of something else that disappears as soon as you stop playing it. Thank you.
Wow. I didn't want to presume when Bob read one of yours that you were going to be trading poems, but I love that you did that. And I love that also that you finished with the story like that. So I think I can safely say this has been one of our richest, fullest evenings since the start of COVID. And it's not over yet. We are going to conclude. Thank you so much, Sari. We're going to conclude with Steve Sibra doing the open mic and taking us out.
Okay, my name is Steve Sibra. I have had the privilege of being a featured reader at It's About Time in the past, and I will get it again in July, and I want to thank Peggy and the organization for that privilege. I have just one poem I'm going to read tonight. I have a book out. I don't know if you can see this, my curses upon the sunshine behind me. But the name of my book is Shoes for Baby. It's available on from Amazon and Barnes and Noble and on eBay and probably on some street corner downtown. But in any way, there are several billion people on this planet that have not purchased it yet, as far as I can tell. And I would like any of you that are interested to get in on this. Anyway, this poem is not from the book, but I will read from it when I am a feature. This poem is dedicated to a good friend of mine who is in Bangalore, India. And the name of this poem is Loud Wheels on a Quiet Road. God has no way of knowing, but he has reached a crossroads in my mind. He has done some things which require an accounting. He is an old owl puzzling over me, twisting his 360 skull to see me, whispering human speech through a fluorescent beak which barks like a dog in Urdu, speaking symbols into ears that are beyond the ken of images, immersed as we all are in the tongues of our ancient brothers. God has lost me in infinite jails of meaning, prisons of understatement and understanding. He is a whore with a heavenly body, but hideous smile. He beckons with a finger encrusted in excrement. I think that I shall turn this car around, even though I must put my wheels in the deepest, darkest ditch of despair. No place before my eyes glorifies my sight like your reflection in my rear view mirror sanctifies the rips and tears in my soul. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. I think it was very appropriate because we were sort of twisting to see you, and we'll remove the sun when you're the featured reader. I'll make sure you get that. But we're going to close now. I'm going to turn off the recording, but not before letting you know that we've been recording, because you will all have the opportunity, if you choose, to watch this again on the It's About Time Writers Reading Series website, excuse me, YouTube. So I'm going to end the recording and we get to, you know, we can still chat. Thank you all for coming.